The Quest Podcast, Funds Industry Conversations.
Hello, podcast listeners, and welcome to this episode of the Quest Podcast with me, Danny Lawler. If you're new to the Quest Podcast, do hit subscribe. If you like what you hear, don't be shy about hitting the like button and sharing with your friends as well. For this episode of the Quest Podcast, I'm joined by Martina Kelly. Martina is a former colleague of mine who we both worked at the Central Bank of Ireland, and she's now an INED and also the Director of Funds at the Institute of Bankers. In addition to that, she also found time to chair the steering group for the EGFSN's report on skills for the international financial services industry, which was published in May 2024. I thought it'd be fascinating to discuss that report with Martina because there's tons of really interesting information in there. So we begin by chatting about what is the EGFSN in any event, what was the background to the report, why was it produced, and then also what were the findings in there in terms of the gaps for skills and the gaps for different types of professional roles in the financial services industry into the future. We chat about the recommendations that the report makes, and thankfully they're slimmed down to just 9. And we also talk about what the next steps are to implement those 9 recommendations and make sure that this report doesn't just gather dust in a cupboard somewhere. We wrap up by talking about any trends that Martina is seeing in terms of education and training in the funds industry in particular, and how they're impacting on the courses being provided by the IOB. So with all of that on the agenda, and tons to get through, let's get on with the podcast.
The Quest Podcast, Funds Industry Conversations.
Hi Martina, always a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you so much.
Since the last time we had you as a guest, you have chaired the expert group on future skills needs work stream on skills needs in the financial services industry. How was that?
Well, first of all, you've just reminded me that I think it's 4 years since we did this, Danny, and I cannot believe that it's that long that I've been in this job in IOB. But anyway, look, can I just tell you a little bit about, because I think sometimes people have heard about the report, but they might not know, like, how did it come about in the first place? So just very briefly, if that's okay.
Oh, absolutely. Let's start with who is the expert group on future skills needs.
Yeah, a really good question, actually. So it's an independent, non-statutory body. That's the way I will describe them, the expert group on future skills needs. And they advise the Irish government on current and future skills needs for the economy. So all sectors, essentially, all right? It sits within, I suppose, the Department of Enterprise, Trade and Employment, who provide the Secretariat support for the EGFSN and support the thing throughout. So that's who they are. I hope that's okay. And they have a website anyway for anyone who wants to know a little bit more. In 2007, they published a report on the international financial services industry on the future skills needs. So 2007, it's a long time ago. And I think they decided there's been a lot of change and so much has happened in that 15 years. And I say 15 years because it was actually 2021 when this study, if you like, of the IFS sector was initiated. We come to the current one, and we have Ireland for Finance, and that's the strategy of the Irish government. So I think most people will know what Ireland for Finance is, and that there are action plans every year in relation to the strategy. And in 2021, it was considered that it was timely to look at the sector in terms of future skills needs. COVID, though, did impact that a bit. So it's again in 2022, and it took a while to get up and running. It would have happened a lot quicker otherwise. So Indicon were appointed. I think people in the funds and asset management sector are very familiar with Indicon. They've done a lot of work for Irish funds.
Yeah.
And they are very experienced, obviously, and they were appointed to prepare and carry out the study. And they did this in conjunction with a steering group. And the steering group I chaired, as you mentioned. So that's where I came into it. Essentially, the idea was to have representatives from all across financial services around the table, and also to have representatives from the public side. So, not just Department of Finance, Enterprise, Trade and Employment, but, Department of Education. There was also higher education, and they have a long name that I can't recall all of it now. IGA, there was regional representation. It was very broad, and a wonderful group of people, in fairness, who sat around the table and worked through the material as Indicon started to present it. So the idea, first of all, was to say, well, what are the key subsectors
Yes.
with the high growth potential? That didn't take that long, in fairness. And they because it's in some cases it was easy enough to find out. There was a lot of consultation with different industry groups and individual firms, and some of them were extremely helpful in terms of getting through that part A of the study.
And so there was 7 subsectors identified, which includes our beloved investment funds, but also asset management, fintech, and payments.
Yeah.
And I wonder, was there any of in those 7 that kind of surprised you? I saw wholesale capital markets, and I thought, no, surprised.
No, it didn't really, Danny. If you think about it, post-Brexit, look at all the entities, who have established here. And I think that was increasingly becoming a very important activity. And obviously, wholesale capital markets covers an awful lot of different types of activities. I would have tended to put funds and asset management into the same as one sector. And I think if you read the report, they are treated as one. And that made sense, to be honest. So the subsectors are identified, and then Indicon had a lot of work to do in terms of, identifying and to quantify, so not just the skills demands from those subsectors. What are the current skills outputs, from they had to look at education, from higher education, further education. What potential is there for upskilling or reskilling, and indeed from economic migration. So they were all things that they were looking at. And then they had to model, based on their own expertise, the skills needs for the subsectors over the period 2023 to 2027, in order to identify the gaps between supply and demand. And when they've done all of that, to put forward recommendations to bridge the gap.
So they're trying to predict not only the numbers of staff that might be required over that period, but also the areas that those staff might be required in, or the skills that those staff might be required to have, which might be different than the kind of priority skills that are there today.
They did, but I mean, the research was extensive. They did obviously a lot of desk research, a lot of academic studies to consider, various papers, but also a lot of engagement with entities. That was very extensive. So a lot of interviews, a lot of man hours required from them, and they reported back to the steering group as they were doing this. And in fairness, they moved very quickly. I think the growth scenarios are really interesting. So, I mean, they provided, and it's in the report. By the way, the report is, it's a really good and rich source of information about international financial services and the subsectors.
Well, it is very good, yeah. There's lots of information in there outside of simply skills gaps,
There is a lot, right? So, but just, I suppose, for the purposes of today and in summary, they were talking about likely employment outcomes for the subsectors in total of between nearly 6,000 and 9,300 persons. So that's a lot. And depending then on the scenario, that could be a gap of between 800 and 4,300 persons based on the potential for skilled personnel to emerge from those areas that we've talked about: education, upskilling, and so on and so forth.
Quite a gap, really. Even
4,000. Yeah. Huge. Yeah. Huge. Now, I mean, it is difficult, right? But I suppose one of the other key area then of interest is where the skills and competence gaps likely to be. And again, I suppose for most people, not a huge surprise, except that they went about it scientifically. But you're talking about ESG and sustainable finance, IT, digital data analytics skills, crypto and blockchain, cybersecurity, AI. So they were all ones that you would expect they're emerging areas to some extent, really important. But then you had what I'll call, the more BAU in terms of risk and compliance. regulatory skills, legal skills, AML skills. So to me, that was very interesting that notwithstanding, what I mean, we've quite a mature industry, but these were the skills gaps that people were highlighting and I suppose concerned about.
I'm presuming that's not that the courses don't exist, but just that the volume of people coming through them needs to increase.
For those set, yeah. For what I'm calling BAU, there are absolutely courses, but again, it's just, I suppose, the way in which the industries in general have grown in the last number of years. So then we're talking about in terms of, what type of, if you had a title, who are you talking about? And you're talking about accountants and tax experts, actuaries, economists, financial analysts, legal people, of course, and IT people. So yeah, I mean, their job titles one is familiar with, and they were the ones that were being identified by everyone.
It's interesting. It said there are some there you could have guessed the emerging sectors like ESG. You could probably have guessed AI and digital assets and the more technology heavy ones. But things like legal professions and compliance, especially post crisis, it's felt that we've had such a focus on risk and compliance. And maybe on risk we could do more skills, but certainly on legal and compliance and accounts that we would have had plenty. But there you go. I guess as I said, it's down to just the growth in numbers required for the industry. I would have also thought maybe asset management and portfolio management.
Sorry, I should have said that.
Yeah, and it's in the list, but I could have kind of guessed it because you do see more firms with MiFID authorizations and or management companies with MiFID top-ups and stuff like that are engaged. So it's definitely more a feature here than it would have been back in the past.
No, that's absolutely right. And I mean, people, the entities that, leaving aside what Intercon were doing on their own research and modeling side, the firms that they were engaging with and interviewing were looking, for their own needs in, this period of time, next 4 years. And they saw potential gaps in these areas. So, and I think anecdotally, we would have always heard about difficulty sometimes of getting risk and compliance professionals, for example. And you're right. Increasingly, the focus is on people with, portfolio management experience. So, as I said, even though that might be expected, it's the way in which this was brought together makes a really good reading, I think. But what do people read? You really want to see, well, what's going to happen? What's the outcome of that? And what they did, obviously, they issued a report with 9 recommendations. Now, the way in which, by the way, the EGFSN works is that there is an implementation period. And that's the one thing, by the way, I really liked about getting involved in this work, because in a lot of cases, you do get reports, and they're really interesting. But if there is no implementation of any recommendations that come through, or no process for that, it's a miss. And the fact that this has a very well set out implementation process, I think, is really important. So let me just tell you a little bit about that, Danny. There are 9 recommendations, but the first one is to set up this national implementation group. I thought super when I saw that. That's really good. Now it's for a 2-year period, and so they really need to get their skates on, because 2 years goes by very quickly. But that is supported by the really good people who are involved in this in enterprise, trade and employment. And it is chaired by an ex-colleague of mine from IOB, Kevin Gallen, who is absolutely passionate when it comes to all this stuff. So that's a really good setup at the top, if you like. And then there are representatives from, the industry groups, from IFS Skillnet are really important, and IBEC, really important stakeholders in all of this, of course. And as I said, the stakeholder groups that you'd expect to see, like Irish Funds, BPFI, and I shouldn't say these, I'm going to leave out people, but Insurance Institute and the Insurance Association. So all of those that you would expect to see.
Yeah. Would you see the central bank in that group as a matter of interest? Because obviously they have skills requirements as well.
They have, but I mean, I don't suppose it's not so much that they'll be part of that group, but they're very interested in it, of course.
Yeah.
And that makes absolute sense. So the way in which it works then is that so far, because they've only met, I think they're on their second or third meeting, and the idea meet quarterly, but activity to go on in between times. So each recommendation is going to be led by one organization. That's really good. And people are signing up to do that. And they're responsible then if they need subgroups to say, well, this is what we need in order to ensure that that recommendation gets over the line. Now, a lot of the recommendations are, just really sensible things like, what the output is from the universities in terms of, what topics, for example, are available. What can you study as an undergrad? And then there's stuff in there about apprenticeships, about supporting people returning to work, which, is really important. There is, I think, I'm not going to think of all these now, but there are 9 of them, right?
Yeah.
If it's okay with you, Johnny and Doe, and if we had a bit of time, just to talk about recommendation number 2, because I think that that's just a really important one.
Develop a skills framework for the IFS sector.
Yes.
As a matter of interest, how did the third level institutions embrace this project? I guess there sometimes can be a tension between educating for industry as opposed to educating for the good and the sake of education. And I don't know whether they are very favorably disposed to developing materials and programs that are specifically aimed at the financial services industry, or whether they prefer to go a different route and look more at education for the sake of it and bigger picture topics.
Well, look, I'm no expert when it comes to, universities, and they wouldn't have been part of the roundtable, but we did have the Department of Higher Education involved. But from what I see, universities want to provide what people want to study. Do you know, if you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So, for example, when it comes to sustainability, when it comes to financial sector type topics like risk management and so on, I think that's what they want to do. But I mean, if I was sitting there, I'd probably be saying, yeah, it's great, I'd love to do all of that, but I need money.
Yeah.
But anyway, look, that's a topic for a different day, and not something that, as I say, I know anything about. But in terms of the skills framework, I think sometimes, it's been talked about quite a bit, but maybe again, just to explain a little bit about the background, that might be helpful. So it is recommendation 2. So it was the priority to be given to all stakeholders in the IFS sector to collaborate in the development of a world-class, love the reference to world-class national skills framework for the Irish financial services industry. Now, IOB are the implementation lead for this recommendation. And to explain how that came about, if you recall, in 2022, there was the Department of Finance retail banking review. And a skills framework for the retail banking sector emerged from that review, and IOB had already started working on that. So when this review of, if you like, the non-banks, or at least non-retail banking, which is more correct, obviously, it made a whole lot of sense to look at this skills framework in the broadest sense, based on the work that IOB had been doing. And by the way, IOB were not the only one. If I just call out here, Irish Funds, for example, had started to explore the possibility of a skills framework for the funds and asset management sector around the same time as this study was starting to emerge. So people were sort of seeing it as an important thing, if you like, to have.
Yeah. What does it look like? Is it kind of role titles with skills that those roles should have, and then linked to providers of training for those skills?
Well, I'll try and briefly explain, right? It really is it's structured. It sets out and categorizes the knowledge and skills required for all the key work activities within, i.e., an organization or an industry in this case. So it's really a way of providing a clear and consistent way to define the technical and professional or transversal skills, which can be important here, that are needed at different levels of expertise. So it's designed to be standards-based, right? It'll be open source, online. So it will enable an individual, to access that. It's designed to enable the ongoing identification of key, current, emerging, and future technical skills and professional competencies needed for each of those subsectors that we've been talking about. It incorporates the training qualifications and professional designations and the CPG aligned to the skills and their associated proficiency levels. So it recognizes then, firms will do their own in-house training in a lot of cases, and individuals will do their, own initiated education or training, and that can be recognized. That's the idea, that, all of that would be recognized within the framework. And then the key thing is all of that is validated and tested, and it's developed then in collaboration with the subsectors. It is supposed to be easy to navigate so that you could go in as Danny Lawler and look to a sector I'm interested in and look at, areas I might be interested in, and you can map what's deemed to be needed and what you have. And then ultimately, well, how can I get to what I need, if that makes sense?
It sounds a little bit like the minimum competency code that the central bank has. And it also sounds like something that would be useful if you think about, fitness and probity assessments, and you're trying to determine what does fitness mean for an individual in a particular role, that it sets an expectation as to what skills an individual might have when they put themselves forward for a particular role in a regulated financial services business.
Well, yeah, maybe. I think there has been, so I mentioned Irish funds because, and the Insurance Institute are also very early sort of organisations to get involved with this. But in the case of Irish funds, they have allocated resources to developing a framework for the sector through their working groups and the members of the working groups. And a prototype has been developed already, okay, and that's been finalised. Now, to be honest with you, Danny, and just even, listening to your questions, I'd love to come back to you, maybe next year or so, and actually tell you how it looks. Because I know how it will look from the prototype, but how it all fits together.
Just sounds like it's got tremendous potential to be something that's valuable for lots of different stakeholders, whether they're firms that are building out their team or from scratch, or whether you're somebody trying to assess or understand what would be expected of me in that role in terms of my skills and experience. And then obviously for organizations that are providing skills training to understand what sectors the demand is in. So it could be very valuable once we get the other side.
Spot on, because it's going to be very useful for the firms. It's going to help them to identify, the existing and emerging skills and proficiency levels. It's going to inform their decisions, on education, training supports, etc. What sort of reskilling, upskilling they believe they might need individually. It's going to help, recruitment agencies. It's going to be, and it will help firms when they are, dealing with career progression and supporting, their staff. And you're right, it's going to be of good benefit to education providers in seeing, well, there's no program there. That's a skill that has been identified. This is the level. But it's all going to be standard based, as I said. So it's going to be assessed to the national framework of qualifications. So you're going to know, well, there's no program there, or there's no training there, and we should develop that because there's a need for that. So from that perspective, it just is, as you've just said, it's going to be of benefit to so many, well, really to everyone.
Yeah. One of the other recommendations that jumped out at me was about apprenticeships, develop and promote apprenticeships as a career pathway. And there's a commentary about existing apprenticeship possibilities. I have to say, I wasn't aware that there was apprenticeship options already. Remember back in the day when I was training as a solicitor, there were still apprenticeships. We were apprentice solicitors, but it pretty much went then. So it's not something I would have associated with the financial services industry. It was more, you think of it more in, say, construction or skills.
You do, but I think the insurance industry seem to be probably leading the field in this one, though I could be wrong. On the banking side, there's a lot of interest too. Maybe not so much in the world we know best, Danny, but it's a huge opportunity. I think it's a wonderful idea.
Oh, I think it's great.
I love the concept of apprenticeships, and it's amazing how that supports individuals who might decide that, to go off and do something else, but they didn't have to go to do a particular program or course when they left school, for example, but going to work in that sort of apprenticeship environment. I love it. I think it's fantastic.
I think it's a great idea. And it could be attractive to people that wouldn't otherwise be attracted to this type of a career. And maybe it's because they prefer to just get stuck in rather than do 4 years of reading textbooks and stuff like that or whatever. But I think it's a great way to get people in who might otherwise not be attracted into or feel that it's for them. And you're
I agreed. And the Insurance Institute are the implementation lead for that recommendation, I think, but if I recall correctly. And so the work that they have done will be really, really excellent in guidance for others.
One of the things that jumped out at me from the report that made me feel like it's got a chance, right, of doing something other than gathering dust is the fact that it managed to limit the recommendations to 9. Sometimes you see these reports, the recommendations run for pages and pages, and it's 50 or 100 recommendations, and you think that's a big ask. Whereas I think 9 feels like it feels achievable, it feels digestible and something that with the national oversight and implementation group in place, that there's a real possibility to grab this and actually in 2 years' time turn around a lot of these recommendations and implement them.
Yeah, no, you're right. And in fairness, the people sitting around the table, including, the industry bodies, including, IFS SkillNet and FSIA, all of those, right? These recommendations got a good airing and discussion. And the objective there was to ensure, well, is this something that, is achievable within, the short to medium term? Now, bear in mind on the skills framework, that is very ambitious. So it is multi-phase and multi-year, and there will be lots of collaboration if you're required, with all of the sectors. But some of the others, they are definitely achievable within the time frame. And I think, as I said, the fact that there is a national implementation group is huge in terms of just marshalling and making sure that progresses well.
And is the intention with that group to be well down the tracks in 2 years?
Oh, yeah.
Great.
Now, it is recognised on recommendation too. There's no way you'd do that in 2 years. But I think it's at the end of this year, for example, there will be an update, a progress report delivered by IOB. So, those sort of milestones will be reaching agreement on milestones for 2025 and thereafter will be an important part as well.
And I suspect a skills framework has got to be dynamic, right? Because the skills that are needed today won't necessarily be the same as the skills that are needed in a couple of years' time. When
you're so right. You are so right. This is absolutely. It's a skills framework that lives. That's the idea.
Well, stepping out of the report and just drawing on your own experience in your role with the IOB, I just wonder, are there trends that you're seeing in terms of, I guess, the asks for individuals for study courses or topics that are popular or are in demand and that demand is there to be filled? Or what kind of trends are you seeing when it comes to the provision of training and education?
Well, first of all, we kicked off our program on designated persons in a fund management company last night. So it's fresh in my mind, right? And I was just saying to the students for that program that, that's one of 2 programs where, and I'm focusing now, Danny, on the funds and asset management sector, by the way, okay, not more broadly. But that's one of 2 programs where we focus on the individual, right? So in this case, designated persons, and our other program is for investment fund directors. And it's all about, developing competency. So in other words, the ability to take on the role, right? And having the skills to take on the role that are required to do a good job, be it a GP or a director, or indeed just, a senior team member within the industry. I think those courses are still very relevant for that. And then additionally to that, we do the technical side of things. But before I touch on that, just to say on what I call the people skills, director, GP, whatever, they are becoming increasingly popular. And I suppose in a sense, it's the way in which the industry is continuing to evolve with a lot more focus on substance requirements, the IAF regime, there are so many reasons why, as an individual taking on a role, taking on this type of program just really works well for you in terms of, as I said, it's confidence, giving you the confidence to take on those roles. And of course, if you do CIFT, well, then you're also signing up to be CIFT alumni with a designation, and it's an annual CPG requirement. And so it's actually not so, well, it is the program, that's great, but it's what comes afterwards in terms of your ongoing and continuous professional development. And the same goes, I suppose, for designated persons. People want to sign on to continuous professional development. And I mean, a designated person, unlike CIFT, doesn't come with a designation, but there is the accredited funds professional designation that IOB organise, again, developed as everything is with the industry and Irish funds in this case. Now, that has been slow, but it's growing. And again, just reflecting the fact people want to learn. They want to keep up to date on things that are just, crazy change, absolute crazy change. So it's really heartening, to be honest, to see the continued interest in those, and including, and particularly for the CIFT, lots of interest from non-Irish people,
Well,
which is brilliant.
I was going to ask you about that in terms of any trends you're seeing on the types of individuals that come forward for the investment fund directorship program. You mentioned maybe the jurisdictions they're from. Also, in terms of maybe their professional backgrounds, do they tend to be from law and accountancy, or are you seeing a broader range than that?
We had our first African student on CIFT program. So actually quite a lot of interest coming from the Middle East. I suppose in a lot of cases, the brand for CIFT is growing. And in terms of the applicants, there'll be usually some sort of a nexus to asset management, but they could have all sorts of different backgrounds, or they're part of a group and they may wish to move, within that group. They might have skills in one part of the group, be it maybe on the banking side. But in a lot of cases, they will have some sort of funds asset management experience to be, and they'll usually have an element of, so they're senior. They may well be sitting on funds boards, maybe considering an INED career, or they want to sit on some of the funds boards within the group. So there's a variety of reasons why people take it. But what's really excellent for the program and for the people in each cohort is to have the wealth of experience that comes from having all those jurisdictions, people from those jurisdictions sitting in the room. It's quite an intensive week of program, of modules. So having, all of that experience shared works out really well. And a lot will come. We have an annual conference for CIFT alumni, and many people will try and come because they get so much from it.
Yeah, a win-win. I think it drives up the education experience and then hopefully drives up standards across the board, which is great, right?
It is, and that's exactly what IOB's mission and objective. It's about raising standards. That's the key thing for us. Everything we do, I mentioned already, is developed in conjunction with industry. And I want to say this now before I forget, right? But I want to give a strong shout out to all of the people. By the way, I'll include yourself because you're speaking at our Jora event, and you did last time, and you were great. But there are so many people like you, Danny, who've had a great innings. They've had having good careers or had good careers, and they want to give back. And so, in terms of events that we do, in many cases they are designed to, provide that update and information on current topics. It's absolutely heartening to see the amount of people who will participate in those, wanting, as I said, to give back, wanting to encourage, the younger people in the industry. And as I said, really heartening. So
yeah, and I think there's a lot of pride in the industry amongst people who have been here for a little while and have, it's been good to a lot of people. It's put bread on a lot of tables, and and giving back
exactly.
is important, and developing skills and bringing up standards again for the next generation to be even better again, for the industry to be even more successful and have even more employees, and hopefully do even better for the people who are invested in the funds or otherwise customers of the regulated businesses that we're all working for and we're all serving.
Absolutely. And I mean, when it comes to, so investor focus, is central, upfront and central in, the GP, the CIFG program, but also in the other ones. And you're right. It's that pride in the industry and what it absolutely delivers for the end investors. That pride is just so important, and so evident. So just on other trends, it's again, IOB have run this sort of entry level program for, I think it's over 20 years. Actually met a lady last night who told me she did the first one back in the 90s. And it's still a really important program. It's an excellent program, to be honest, in terms of giving you a really good grounding in what funds are and who does what, essentially. And it is university accredited, so there's exams attached to it, etc. Otherwise, we have a new program which is really generated a lot of interest in capital markets. Makes sense, though, doesn't it, in terms of what we've talked about or mentioned briefly earlier about, the growing importance of the asset management industry here. So that's a really popular one. Really long-standing programs, I suppose, in the technical areas of, alternative investments or complex instruments, and sustainability, obviously, really important. And IB continue to develop sort of additional programs because there's so many different aspects to sustainable finance, be it compliance, reporting, understanding the whole myriad of what is entailed in regulation and just the broader issues that relate to sustainable. They tend to be, a lot of those programs will be cross-sectoral, which makes sense. It applies to everyone. And they would be, I suppose, the key one for, if I'm looking at just this sector generally. There are others in terms of, the inside out leadership change program is really important from a diversity perspective, a really important one. And they're the ones that are coming to mind, Danny.
Yeah.
So as I said, we do actually, and we're trying to do more, but this is difficult just in terms of the timing. What we're trying to do, I suppose, in terms of, okay, we have the people programs, we have the university accredited programs, quite a broad range. We're trying to do masterclasses that really hone in on specific topics for this sector. So, for example, we had our either third, I think, liquidity risk management, really popular one. Fund distribution, really popular one. We want to do more in that area. So it's not accredited, short programs, really designed to look at specific topics and try and limit it to, somewhere between 6 and 9 hours over a period, maybe 3 days or, 3 weeks or whatever it is.
Yeah. It's a great
ambition. Yeah, we have big ambition there, but it just does take some time to get everything lined up.
Yes. And a great way to, well, depending on people's time availability and the stage that they're at in their career and their levels of knowledge, whether they're beginners or not, it's important to have the bases covered so that people feel like they can continually grow and develop and progress and then look for hopefully promotions within their organization or to move to other organizations, because we've big skill gaps to fill with 4,000 people. And it's all good news, really, in terms of the projected growth for the industry. But that only happens if we continue to look after our people and train them and make sure that they're able to do the job to a very high standard when they do get there. And so all the role that the organizations like IOB do are very important for the overall success of the industry.
It is, and it's not easy in a large firm when you are trying to support people, because there's a big commitment, in terms of time and cash, if you like. So it's really important, and everybody knows it's really important. But when things are stretched, it is difficult,
Yeah.
And we recognize that.
But on that happy note, with all of these new jobs coming our way and all these skills gaps that are going to be filled, we'll wrap up the podcast with people feeling happy and bright to head off into their days. Do read that report, or at least try and have a flick through the this expert group on future skills needs report, because that there's excellent material in there besides the specific gap analysis of the skills, but just an understanding of the industry and the different subsectors identified, because there's a lot of intel in that report that's very worthwhile reading. And thank you, Martina, for your time on the podcast, for chairing that group and for sharing.
Danny, as I said to you, I would, when this becomes something that people can put their finger on, I'd like to come back and talk to you, because I think then it becomes more real, and hopefully all this good stuff that we've talked about is there to be seen. But thank you for interviewing me in the first place.
Well, perfect. And I look forward to having you back in the next episode, where we get to talk through how these 9 recommendations have come to life.
Fantastic.
The Equest Podcast, Funds Industry Conversations.